So yeah, feel free to ask me questions if you are okay with being recorded. I have no issues, so please go ahead. All right, so we'll start with FAL convention today. This is another very important convention for you guys to understand, because this has a lot to do with your ship operations, and this is the commercial aspect of shipping. So one of the key things that you guys have to deal with as a senior officer is the commercial aspect of shipping, which you probably didn't have to do with, so far in your rank. When I say commercial aspect, you know what I mean. I mean budgets, finance, money, the thing that matters to the ship owners, and that's how they judge your performance on the ship as well. So that is the shift mindset. You know, I keep saying that from junior officer to senior officer, the main thing is not an increase in your technical knowledge, but rather an increase in, or rather a shift in the mindset that's required. All right, I'm getting some background noise. I have to find out whose mic is it which is on, so it will take me some time. If your mic is just muted, please.
Just mute everyone soon.
Okay, I'm.
Do you?
That's
That's
what I've
fine.
done. Yeah, I think it was Gibbo. So yeah, that's a good suggestion. All right, so guys, let me start with the FAL convention, because like I said, the FAL convention has a lot to do with the commercial aspect of shipping, and that is what you guys have to understand as senior officers, how this implicates you. So make sure that as senior officer, you know, the technical knowledge and all that. I always say when you guys become senior officers, you will realize that it's not so much the technical knowledge, but more about what we have talked about so far. So when we talk about management, you know, we've been talking about leadership, team working, communication, managing people, conflict, resolving conflicts, managing individuals, managing team. This is what will be mostly your job, and you'll realize how important this unit is once you become a senior officer. And the other aspect are the conventions, of course. And I've always told you that you must understand the conventions from an application point of view, not from a theoretical point of view, because you can any day go to the IMO website and read the convention. You don't need me to explain the convention to you. I'm sure you understand English and you can read the convention yourself. But you must, my job here is to make you understand it from an application point of view. And that is what you'll be expected to do as a senior officer. All right, so I'll change the slide now, otherwise it gets boring. So if you don't know what FAL convention is, FAL convention stands for Facilitation of Maritime Traffic. So the word FAL, it's not an acronym for anything. It basically stands for Facilitation of Maritime Traffic. And that means how fast the ship can come into the port and leave. Because if you don't know, the performance of ports is judged on their ability to have a fast turnaround of ships. That's how they compete with one another. That is their competing criteria, the turnaround time. The faster the ships can go in, discharge, load cargo and come out, that is how the performance of ports are judged. And that is why FAL convention becomes very important for not only seafarers, but also for people who are part of the shipping operations on the shore side. For you guys, of course, FAL convention is important because of the paperwork and the commercial aspect that is included, the commercial implication of FAL convention. So historically, and if you can read the slide, historically, the port clearance process was very complicated. It was very time consuming. There was a lot of paperwork that was involved, and that would cause a delay of ships in many ports. Now, as ports started to realize that the competitive advantage of their operation lied in the fact that they need to turn around ships quite fast, they realized this, and then the processes started to change. I remember when I was a cadet and we used to go to a port in India, and it was my job to do the paperwork for chief officer. Some ports had books to be filled, books every time. I remember we used to go to the port of Chennai in India, that's South India, and we used to go there every week. So we had a Singapore, Malaysia, Chennai route, and every week we would go there. I would have to fill that book, that thick book, and it was the same information every time, a waste of time. So this is just an example I'm saying. But now things have changed, of course, and that is why the seafarers were being asked to fill number of forms, and that was causing a lot of delay. So what the ports realized that this is something that is causing unnecessary delay in traffic, and costing them money, because the more ships they can get in, the more money they get from the ship owners. So that's how the Facilitation of Maritime Traffic, or the FAL convention, was launched way back in 1965, of course, to tackle with this bureaucracy and tackle with this problem. In 1967 it came into force, But what the FAL convention did was basically made it easy for the ships to go through this paperwork and try to standardize the paperwork all over the world in different ports. Make it easy, make it simple, and make it standardized, so that irrespective of which ship, which port you are going into, you basically are providing the same information, and you are providing it once, not multiple times. So that would avoid unnecessary delays in maritime traffic, and also helps the ship to get the port clearance quickly. So the main objective here with FAL convention was to get port clearance. So before a ship can go into the port, it needs to achieve clearance. I'm sure you guys are sailing for some time, you know that. So there are different kinds of clearance. Some clearance is of course obtained by the agent, but for the agent to obtain that clearance also, he needs or she needs information from your ship. So basically what kind of cargo you are carrying, who are the people on board, what are they carrying with themselves, dangerous goods on board, any other stores, all that information. I'll show you what those declarations are. So you need to declare the information, and then you get a faster port clearance if everything is fine. And that helps you to get into the port quickly, finish the loading, discharging, and then also finish the paperwork before you leave the port. And that helps to get the process started, or rather get the process completed quickly. So the FAL convention, as you can see, the key word here is to get the highest practical degree of uniformity. And that means that try to make the process and the paperwork uniform in all countries. Otherwise, before, different countries had different procedures, different paperwork. It was very confusing. Every time you had to do a different kind of paperwork. Now the convention has reduced it to just 9, the number of declarations which are required by public authorities. Now 7 of them have been approved by IMO, 2 are additional. So 2 are still there. I'll show you which the 7 are, which the 2 are in the next couple of slides. But these are the generalized declarations that all your ships have to be filled. However, I've told you last time as well, with any convention, there's always a loophole in the convention. The loophole exists in the convention, any convention, is because when you come up with a convention that is applicable to the entire world and the shipping of the entire world, you can't have something very strict. So you need to be very flexible in your approach. To achieve that flexibility, they have to keep a convention very generalized. So to leave that flexible approach to different countries and to use their approach, right? So an example being, if IMO says that we want a certain kind of simulator for seafarer training, and that simulator costs a lot of money, there are states which cannot afford that kind of state-of-the-art simulators. So IMO cannot dictate the standard. So what IMO says is, okay, they recommend simulators. So different countries have their own standard of simulators depending on how much funding they get from their government or how much facilities they have access to. So that's why they have to keep it generalized. So similarly with FAL convention, they had to keep it certain generalized. And that's the loophole that is there in FAL convention, because in many countries still bureaucratic processes still allow states to have more forms than what has been recommended by FAL convention. So IMO says that yes, FAL convention, you need these 9 forms. That's all I need. But it is within your rights. So when I say states, I mean countries, all the countries that are member states of IMO. So the IMO says that if the state feels, if the country feels that they want some more information, they have the right to introduce further documentation. And that's why still in many countries, and this is mostly in developing countries or third world countries, where the bureaucracy is still alive, where you will see that still they're asking for some unnecessary information, which still, I mean, it's up to them. I mean, which you will find is a deviation from the FAL convention. So when you go to different ports, just make a comparison and see what is required of you. FAL convention is normally the job of deck officers, because all these declarations and everything have to be collected by deck officers. But I'll also show you how it implicates the engineers and everybody on board. All right, FAL convention also very similar to STCW convention and Maritime Labour Convention. It contains of standards. Standards means that you have to follow them. They are compulsory, they are mandatory. And then they have some recommended practices, which are not mandatory to follow, but you should follow them. That is what they recommend, but it's not mandatory. All right, they just recommend it to you. And the convention, of course, defines standards as internationally agreed measures which are necessary and practicable in order to facilitate international maritime traffic. So you will see, if you go through my slides, especially with conventions, there are certain information I highlight in red. And I do that because some of you may be going for orals this time, some of you may not. So if you are not going for orals and maybe you are trying to study for orals later on and you are going through my slides and trying to study for the conventions, you don't have to go through all the slides, you don't have to go through all the convention. If you just read what I have highlighted in red and remember these keywords. So when the surveyor asks you any question about the convention, if you mention these keywords, you will find that the surveyor will be very impressed with your answer. And that is what I have done. So all the conventions, right from occupational health and safety to STCW, Maritime Labour Convention, FAL Convention, and whatever we do, you will see I've highlighted some things in red. And that's because that gives you the keywords, which if you remember just those keywords and provide it to the surveyor or answer it to the surveyor, he'll be very impressed. All right, so of course, IMO is still asking the contracting governments and the member states to adjust their laws and to make it simple, to keep it unified, to keep it standardized. But they have, of course, allowed states to come up with their own procedures. However, the states have to go through certain formalities. So they have to document, or rather they have to submit paperwork to IMO, which justifies the reason of why they want to introduce extra documents than those recommended by FAL Convention. It's of course a time consuming process, but the states are allowed to do that, and they can justify, if they can justify that they need more information from the ships, they will be allowed to ask you of that information. Currently, 116 out of 173 IMO member states have ratified this convention, and it pretty much applies to about 93% of the world's fleet. So it's pretty much applicable to most of the countries. FAL Convention has been ratified by most of the countries. And there are still about 50 odd states which have not ratified this convention, and they will go by their requirements. So you might go to certain countries and find that it's not ratified. All right, so what are the forms that are required by FAL Convention? So you can see here that I pretty much mentioned the forms here. So you have the, I'll show you the example of the forms as well and what they look like. I'm sure you have seen it on the ship, but these are mainly the information required about, general arrival, stay and departure of the ship, arrival and departure of persons, stowaways. These are the areas that are covered. These are not the forms. These are the areas that are covered by the FAL Convention. So stowaways was a new requirement, or rather a form was issued. I'll show you that form as well. So the FAL Convention pretty much covers these areas here: the arrival and departure of the vessel, the stay of the vessel, the public health, quarantine. It's going to become more important now with COVID now in place. So one of the questions in the assignment, and I don't mind telling you this right now because you'll have to research on it. A question in the assignment, in the group assignment I have asked regarding FAL Convention is that you have to go online and research how the COVID and measures due to COVID that have been implemented, how it has affected the FAL Convention. So this is something that you will have to research and provide me with the answer. So that would be one of the questions. So this is pretty much what they focus on. Before I show you the forms and all the other things, there is of course a manual that has been made, rather introduced by IMO, which is called an explanatory manual to the Convention on Facilitation of International Maritime Traffic. If there is any kind of guidance or doubts that you have, even when you're on the ship, you can actually go and consult that manual, and that manual provides you with all the guidance, the interpretation and the explanation of the different annexes of the FAL Convention. And it will also help you in understanding the legal provisions, something that I will be talking about today as well. But if you want more information, or if you are trying to learn more about it when you're on the ship and you've forgotten what we have discussed, you can go and study this manual as well. But I'll be discussing the key parts of the manual, the key provisions of this manual today in the class. All right. So here, so these are the forms I was talking about. So remember, I told you that there are 9 documents, and 7 of that have been approved by IMO. Those 7 are required, and then 2 other are not approved by IMO, but it is more related to health and quarantine and all that. So you can see the 7 forms are: first is the IMO General Declaration. Then the second one is Cargo Declaration. When you declare for cargo, General Declaration more is about overall about the ship and what all it has. The Cargo Declaration is very specific to the cargo. Especially, they are very particular about the dangerous goods, the class of the dangerous goods. And I'll tell you more about this when we finish talking about this. Then you have the ship stores declaration. So you have engine room stores, you have deck stores, you have catering stores, all that you have to declare. Then the crew effect declaration. This is very important as well. And I'll talk about the legal aspect of this as well. Crew effect declaration is the crew who are sailing with you, or when we talk about passenger ships, or if there are any passengers on the ship, then what are they carrying with them? You have to declare that as well. Then you have the crew list. The crew list comprises of the list of the names and the passport details and all that, whether they have valid documents. And then of course you have the dangerous goods manifest, and the dangerous goods manifest is mainly applicable to ships which are carrying dangerous goods. If you're not carrying dangerous goods, then this is of course not applicable to you. So these are the 7 forms. The 2 other documents that are required is under the Universal Postal Convention and the International Health Regulation. So this is more regarding the quarantine and the health and the free pratique, the derating certificate and all that. Those are these, I mean, related to that the ship is healthy, it's clean. And that's why I said many countries will have their own requirements. They will have their own interpretation of these 2 forms, because some countries are going to be very strict about quarantine and the health standards or the sanitary measures you have been maintaining. And some countries may be relaxed, or they may be very happy with the minimum information. So that's why those 2 have been kept open to interpretation by different states. So the general declaration, cargo list, crew declaration, and the passenger list, they constitute the maximum information. And the ship's stores declaration, the crew's declaration, they incorporate the agreed essential minimum information. That's because you can't probably list everything that you are carrying on the ship, on the stores, and the crew also, they have certain privacy issues as well. So that's why IMO has recommended minimum information good enough for the states to make an assessment on what the ship is carrying. I'll show you the forms, but I'll talk a little bit about 2 of these forms, which are very important for you guys to understand. The first one is, of course, the dangerous goods manifest and the cargo list declaration. Now, some of you may think that it's simply declaration of dangerous goods. It's not a very simple declaration of dangerous goods, because when you declare the dangerous goods that you're carrying on the ship, you have to remember that you have to also arrange for all the associated procedures associated with carrying of dangerous goods. So if you have declared dangerous goods, that you're carrying dangerous goods, you have to remember that port state can come on board your ship and inspect your dangerous goods. So say, for example, you're carrying a container of dangerous goods. They can come on board your ship and they will inspect if that container has been marked with the appropriate IMO labels on all the 4 sides or not. When you're carrying dangerous goods, are you carrying the appropriate equipment required for it? So for example, if those dangerous goods are prone to poisonous gas release, so do you have oxygen mask available to you, or do you have the face mask, or other what you call the protective equipment? If you are carrying chemicals, then are you carrying hazmat suits? So it is all associated with that. So if you have declared dangerous goods, you also have to remember whether you're carrying the medicines for it or not, the medical equipment for it or not, the protective equipment for it or not, because tomorrow the post-state control will come on board your ship because you have declared dangerous goods. And if they inspect your ship, and although you have declared the dangerous goods, they will definitely ask you about the associated equipment, the associated manifest, the details of the dangerous goods, whether the manifest is detailed or not. So sometimes some shipping agents don't provide a very good manifest, a detailed manifest. So if you don't have the detailed manifest for you, if the manifest is not part of the fire plan, because when you're carrying dangerous goods, your ship's crew has to be trained to deal with fires associated with dangerous goods. How will they be trained? Only if you have included the location of the dangerous goods, the class of the cargo included in the fire plan. So all that is associated. That is why it's very important. So don't think that dangerous goods declaration means you have to only tell them that this is the class of cargo I'm carrying, it's there in the container, now I've done my job. It's not that only. So it's not that simple. You have to remember that. All right. I've told you this before, as a senior officer, when you start making declarations, when you start putting your signatures in documents, you're implicating yourself legally in many things. So you have to always make sure about the implications that are associated with your signature, and make sure that you have taken appropriate measures and steps to protect yourself legally. That is one aspect of it. The second aspect I want to talk about is the crew effect declaration. I'll talk about it as I change my slide, otherwise it's quite boring. Any questions so far, guys? I'll take a break. Any questions?
No, thanks, Sam. Awesome.
Right. Thank you very much, guys. So like I told you guys, this is the important bit here is for you to understand it, the legal perspective, the legal implication, how you get implicated legally into these kind of things. So see,
Sam, sorry, I have a question.
Sure.
I had one experience when I was on board. We were doing coasting in Europe, and we went to one of the German ports, and apparently our vessel was carrying this fumigated cargo, and no, we were not aware that for fumigated cargo you have a special gas detector. So what the PA in Germany, you have the water police, so that they are the ones to come and check the dangerous goods requirements. And upon that, they told that the vessel is not carrying this required gas detector. We had a multi-gas detector, but it was a special kind of gas detector that was required. So in that case, we were chartered by Maersk Line, and but the crew was from our own company, Seaspan. So at this time, who's liable for this one?
Liability will always lie with you. That is not you, but with the ship's master. That is the problem. The problem is liability lies with you. So that's why I said the important bit here is, and I'll tell you what to do. What your master should have done in this case. The master, what happens when you're carrying some kind of dangerous goods. For example, you were carrying something related to fumigation and all that. So what would I do on the ship? This is what I used to do on the ship. So as soon as you have been informed by the shipping agent that you are going to be carrying dangerous goods on board, they will give you the manifest, they will give you the class of cargo, the equipment that you're carrying and everything. So the first check has to be done by the chief officer who goes through the IMDG code, and the IMDG code will specify what is required for particular class of cargo to be carried. So you have to carry all that, especially with terms of fire and spillage and protective equipment, medical first aid and all that. And the manifest will have that as well. You immediately have to send that information to the next port, the agent in the next port. And this is actually part of the shipping agents as well. The company should do it. But as a master as well, you have to send that document immediately to the shipping agent in the next port and inform them these are the class of cargo I'll be carrying with him. And this is done electronically these days. But as a master or a chief officer, this is the additional precaution you have to take. And you have to let them know that, see, I have everything that is required of me as per IMDG code. Is there anything special required as per your port or your ship, this thing? Then the shipping agent, it puts the onus on the shipping agent then, who will inform you, and then you can inform the company. Because see, if Germany has a special regulation, they want something in particular, something special, but it's not there in the IMDG code. They will have it somewhere documented. So the only person who will give it, the documentation to you, will be the shipping agent of the next port, the German agent, whoever it is. And only then you can carry it. Otherwise, you can't imagine, you can't have it in your, or you can't dream about it that, okay, the next port will have something like that. So that's how it should have been done. And I'll talk about that as well. I had an experience myself. If you go to the port of Nigeria, Lagos in Nigeria, they define controlled drugs very differently to how it is defined in the medical first aid book. So when we were going to Nigeria in Lagos, they told us that all the controlled drugs should be with the master, which is the case, right? But they provided some additional information. They said controlled drugs are not the drugs which are defined by the medical first aid book or whatever, the ship captain's medical guide, those days it used to be called. But any drug ending with the term ENE, the letter ENE is considered a controlled drug, and you have to keep it with the master. Now we did what we could. Okay, so we did all we could, but unfortunately, there were still some drugs in there which were going by their technical name and by the trade name, but the technical name had the ENE ending. So we were caught, and the customs came on board and they said, oh, this is controlled drugs, we're going to fine your ship heavily and all that. But the shipping agent stepped in, of course, and he took the responsibility, and he said, they have done what they could, and there's a difference in trade name and shipping name. So these are these implications that will happen in every port. So that is where, from your side, you have to take the best measure you can, but make sure you keep the agent in the next port informed and completely in the loop all the time, because you won't be sometimes be able to guess all the requirements of the next port. That's what. All right, I'll keep going. I don't know whether I answered your question or not, but this is my experience.
Possible to ask a question, Sam, please?
Yeah, sure, Eddie.
Yeah, just before I ask question, Lagos used to be a very dangerous port. Used to be lots of pirates was jumping on the ships. If you remember that. Anyway, no offense to any Nigerian guys there. We used to take ships, tankers, crude oil from Basra to Philadelphia. And the cargo, before we arrived, like we tried to ventilate, to cool the cargo down, because it's a certain cargo between the cargo on board the ship and the pipes to go to the tanks, in that in US. So by the time we arrive US, doesn't matter what we do, the cargo was still, the temperature was still more high. So we still, we used to stay once, we stayed about 1 month. So we used to go there and party outside, you know, almost every day, you know, service boats come picking us up and we go party and back. Who's responsible for that delay?
Who was causing the delay?
There is the temperature of the cargo was more than the temperature to be received from the pipes to the tanks, you know, from the shore in Philadelphia. Yes, we're not responsible for the delay because we done everything, you know, like we used to open the tank covers and that, and by reducing the temperature of the cargo, it's not like you're heating up. You're heating up, there is a Florence run from the thermostat, whatever, that's run from the engine room towards the tanks, and you can heat
we'll talk about this in the break. Otherwise, it breaks the flow.
Okay.
We'll talk about it in the break. All right, guys, I'll keep going because otherwise it stops the flow of the conversation. So, yeah. So thanks for sharing the IMO forms as well, Vasala. I think you did it. All right, so yeah, I'll keep going, guys. So I was talking about the legal aspects of declarations, and you know, we talked a little bit about the legal aspects when we talked about. And like I said, that you can never know about the requirements of every port. Generally, in some ports in the world, they have their own requirements, and they're allowed to do that. But make sure that you keep the agent. And this is mainly the part of the deck side. You know, the deck department does it. But I understand there are many engineers today in the class as well, and I want to quickly discuss the legal implications of it before they get bored and they say, what the fuck are we doing here, and better we go from this class. So there are about 45 of you today. So see, the legal aspects is every time you are declaring anything and you're putting your signature against it, you are pretty much implicating yourself. All right, so whether it's whether it's a personal declaration and whether it's the overall declaration. And that's why I said that tomorrow, if you are an engineer and you are declaring stores, engineer room stores, now maybe the second engineer and the chief engineer is going to sign up or sign for it. As soon as you put your sign, then you are legally implicated. So you're responsible now towards, you know, if there is anything untoward. Now there are many ports which are very dodgy. I'll tell you, I don't want to name any ports, but there are some ports which are dodgy and they look for these opportunities to find the ship or to get something out of the ship in terms of, you know, I mean, you know about all these practices, I'm sure. So our job as seafarers is not to provide them with that opportunity as much as we can. So I'll show you an example here. The example here is, of course, see, this is IMO cargo declaration and you have general declaration. The importance thing here is as well as with personal declaration. Now, this is, I just put this as a joke here, but it's actually from one of the, somebody actually sent it to me from one of the students who went back on the ship and said, this is how somebody filled it. No, it's a spelling mistake, but it was a nice joke. So I thought I'd put this up for you guys to see. But some ports, the point I want to make here is that you can see your signatures are there against your declaration. And I'm sure you're doing that every time. So some ports are very particular about certain things. For example, we used to go to Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia was very particular about any kind of pornographic material. And that pornographic material is not how you would describe pornographic. It would also be, you know, a poster of a scantily clad lady, or it could be glamour magazines. It's not only about, you know, porn movies I'm talking about. So we used to be very aware of the fact. So what we would do, everything used to be locked up in the bond locker. We used to call it bond locker. I don't know whether you guys still call it bond locker or not, but all the alcohol, everything. So they were very particular about that. So you have to make sure that, you know, one of my bosun one time, he had a poster of Pamela Anderson. You know, those days, Pamela Anderson used to be the hot person. I don't know, off the point, but yes, Pamela Anderson. So what he did was he forgot to take off that bloody poster. And that poster of Pamela Anderson, she was not even naked. She was in a swimsuit from Baywatch. I still remember that poster. It was a Baywatch poster. And these guys started inspecting the ship and they found that Baywatch poster and they were very unhappy about it. And, you know, they kind of, you know, privately kind of threatened the captain, because Saudi Arabia, they don't worry so much about fining. They have a lot of money, but they are very strict with the rules and everything. Anyway, there are some other stories as well. I'll tell you some other time how the pilot was asking for porn in Saudi Arabia. So although we had locked everything up, he was asking us for some porn movies. So anyhow, not to go off topic here. Then there are certain ports which are very particular about the cash that you're carrying. Sometimes you're carrying, you know, cash, and that cash has to be declared. I remember when I was a cadet, one of our sister ships, and my friend was on that ship. That ship was going to Myanmar, you know, Rangoon, Myanmar. So in Myanmar, you have to declare the cash that you're carrying. Now, many people, many seafarers don't declare the cash. they are carrying. And those days, cadets were getting paid in cash in my company. So the cadets were getting paid in cash. So he had some cash because we used to sell for 15, 16 months at one go. So he had some cash with him and he didn't declare it because he was afraid that the people on the ship will come to know he's carrying so much cash. And when these agents came on board, the customs, Myanmar customs, they actually inspected every cabin and they found this about $4,000 to $5,000 in his cabin, and they confiscated the entire cash. This is a true story, not making it up. So they confiscated his 12 or 15 months of salary and they took it away. He couldn't do anything. And the last story here is I'll tell you about a chief engineer who was in my company. This happened on my ship. We were in Singapore. In Singapore, you have to declare cigarettes that you are carrying, personal cigarettes that you are carrying. Every stick, to the stick, you have to declare it to the stick. So that engineer, chief engineer, he was from Poland. He was a Polish chief engineer. It was his first contract in our company. That was the first time he came on board. He came to Singapore. And when he was filling the crew declaration, he just filled a very abstract number of the cigarettes. Now the customs in Singapore, they came on board and they were not very happy with the chief engineer's answer. So what they did, they gave an opportunity. So they told the chief engineer that we want the exact number of cigarette sticks that you're carrying. The chief engineer, he was very busy in the engine room. He said, I don't have the time to count my cigarettes. I don't care what you say or what you want me to do. The custom agents were very patient. Actually, they were very cooperative. They said, we want to give him an opportunity because every extra cigarette stick that we'll find, we'll charge him $60 for it. I still remember that amount, $60 for every stick. And I remember they found about 25 odd extra cigarette stick in his cabin and he was fined. And he had to pay the fine from his own pocket. The company doesn't pay you. The company won't compensate for it because, so why am I telling you all these stories? I'm sure you have some stories as well and you can discuss it in the break I give you. But I'm sharing these stories is because, see, there are some legal implications. There are some personal implications to this as well. So when you're required to declare something, make sure you do it honestly, whether it's dangerous goods, whether it's ship stores, whether it's spare parts, whether it's personal declaration, because as soon as you put your sign against it, now you're implicated. So if they find something untowards, something that is not, that means you have not declared factually. And that was a wrongful declaration. Wrongful declaration anywhere is fined or can be fined. All right, I'll keep going and then you can tell me about your stories in the break. FAL convention has also come up with something called the FAL convention is not only now limited to declarations, but they have over time worked on something called the harmonized commodity description and coding system. So if you find this description very complicated, I'll explain it to you simply. So what the harmonized coding system did was, sorry, I missed one slide. This is what they did. The FAL convention was also given the responsibility of finding out that the cargo that is being declared by the agents and the ship masters and the shipping agents or rather the shippers is actually the cargo that is you are carrying. Because a lot of these agents, shipping agents, they were taking advantage of a big loophole where they were classifying their cargo under a broader category of cargo. So, if you are carrying a certain type of cargo, you have to pay more freight for it. So for example, dangerous goods, because dangerous goods, when you carry dangerous goods, the handling, the packaging, the storage system, that requires more effort. So the port is going to charge the shipping agents more money. The shipping agents don't want to pay that extra money. So what they used to do was they would declare their cargo under the, the shipping name or some trade name or some other name, some local name. Or if you are carrying certain kind of cargo, which is very sensitive in other ports, like for example, animal products or, hides or certain metals or certain other cargo, which is very sensitive, considered sensitive in some ports. The shipping agents were taking advantage of the fact that they could ship that cargo under a particular name, a local name, but they had to do it or a trading name. So they have to now classify their cargo based on this harmonized system of code, because this makes it very clear to the ports and the people who are handling this cargo, as well as to the people, the seafarers as well, what kind of cargo they are carrying, and then appropriate freight or a charge can be imposed on the agent. So this is what they came up with this as well. So it was very specific regarding, so you can see each category has subcategory as well. So you can see an example I've given you is that 0204.30.00 refers to carcasses and carcasses, half carcasses of lamb frozen. So that's how specific it becomes. You can't just say a carcass. You can't just ship your cargo under a carcass or an animal carcass. You have to make it very specific to what kind of cargo you're sending. So that's what they came up with. So the harmonized code is a very vast code. I don't want to go through the details of it. It's very boring for you because mainly it's the job of the port and the shipping agents. But you have to know about it, because tomorrow when you are dealing with any kind of paperwork, you have the right to ask the shipping agent about these kind of documents, because in some ports they will ask you about these documents as well. So the harmonized code is divided into 21 sections, 96 chapters. It pretty much describes all the cargo that can be sent. This is not related to dangerous goods. Dangerous goods is under IMDG code. This is related to goods that are not classified under dangerous goods, but all the other goods as well, which may be considered sensitive in certain countries. So you have to make sure that you can ask the shipping agent about this kind of paperwork if it's required. We come back to FAL convention. So FAL convention requires, sorry about that. FAL convention has made it very easy. So before, when you needed hundreds of copies of stuff, FAL convention says you don't require more than these number of copies. All right, so 5 copies of general declaration, 4 copies of cargo, 4 copies of, this is the minimum that is required. So FAL convention recommends this. Of course, individual states can have their own recommendations. They can have something more than that. But according to FAL convention, they don't require anything more than that. So if you're providing the ports with this information, these number of copies of documents, that should be more than enough. All right, so 1 copy of the declaration of health, 4 copies, you can pretty much read it. And then this is for arrival. And now this is for departure port. While departure port, these are the number of copies that you require when you're departing for every declaration. So I'll show you here how it has changed. So the maximum number of forms now that you require on arrival is 24. And on departure, I think it is about 16, if I'm not wrong. On departure is about 9, 12, 16. So on arrival, it is 24, and departure is 16. And this is an improvement over the previous system, where the maximum number of copies that was noted by one port was 213. In one port, they found 213 copies of a document which was required, which has now been reduced to 24 and 16. So you can see it's a vast improvement. The bureaucracy has reduced a lot now. But always remember that loophole that I talked about. All right, I'll keep going, and then when I finish off, I'll give you guys your break. So I've talked about this already, so I don't want to repeat this. So wrongful declaration is very important that you have to be aware of. Remember that don't declare something incorrectly, otherwise you are legally implicated. You have to respect every state's requirements. I've told you about this as well. The example I gave you about Lagos, Nigeria, where the medicine, they defined a medicine under a particular controlled drugs. And that is what you have to respect that requirement, even though you may not agree with it. You have to follow that agent's requirements. All right. There are certain department heads not taking such conventions seriously. I've given you that example as well about the chief engineer who did not take it very seriously, and then he was fine. But what happens is, when you are the department head, when you are the boss, when you are the senior officer, if you have a lax attitude towards declarations, then your staff will have the same attitude as well. So if you are required to take an inventory of ship stores or engine room stores or paint locker, and you have to do a thorough job, make sure you do a thorough job. Because if the standard you set, or if the culture you set on your ship is that I don't care about all this paperwork, it's all bullshit, and you don't care about it either, that's what your staff is going to learn as well. So they have to learn why this is important, why this is serious. And that's why I'm teaching it to you guys, so that you can teach it to your staff and make sure that you set the culture where it is taken seriously. Do the best you can. Sometimes I'm not asking you to count each and every ball bearing and each and every screw that you have on the ship, but you have to do the best job. And otherwise, if you have not been able to accurately count something, mention it in the declaration. Say that, this is based on my counting, may be subject to changes. The more honest you are in your declaration, the better it is for. And finally, having the attitude that it's a problem of the deck department. Now, this is especially for the engineers in my class, that don't think it is a problem of the deck department. Any kind of ship delays or any kind of wrongful implications on your department as well, or rather the engine department as well, can also lead to unnecessary delays, and the company won't be happy about it. All right. Do you guys want a break? I will take a 10 minutes break, and you come back at 10 o'clock or 10:02, and we'll start at about 10:02. All right. And then I'll continue from there. Otherwise it's becoming too long. So short break, guys. Come back at about 10 o'clock and we'll continue from there. 7 minutes break.
Okay. Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, thanks.
7 minutes and 25 seconds, Sam. Okay.
Hi, Sam, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Tell me.
Yeah, Sam. Once I had a experience where when you go to California, they have the US have their own form, and in that one you need to include all the stores in the ship. Like basically, normally when we go to the other post, we don't declare our deck store and engine store and all of. But when I went to California, I had the experience that the agent wants it from the engine room as well, like the engine stores. So in this scenario, the engine store is so much that the second engineer is less interested in getting this all done.
Of course.
So he gave me a 2 months back inventory going along with all the information. So the master is the one who's submitting with his final signature on this document. So what happens in that case? The master will be held responsible?
No, if master will be held responsible, yes, if he doesn't make a note of it. So master has to make a remark on it. So that's why if you are a deck officer or whether you're an engineer officer, doesn't matter. If you are the one signing it, you have to mention it there that this is subject to factual declaration from whoever has declared it. It's not you who has carried out the inventory. So you see, many engineers, they often had a problem with on my ship as well. And I always used to tell them that I think this is a good practice because it also helps you to do an inventory check for any kind of store order or not. But people will do that. On my ship also they did that. So when you are signing it, to answer your question, you have to make a note there that I am signing it, like it should say that this is subject to factual declaration from whoever is declaring it. I am not taking responsible for then you are clear of that implication. Then of course, whoever is declaring it will be implicated. So that's why I said, anytime if you are not sure about something, then don't sign it. If you are signing it and still you're not sure, maybe due to commercial pressure, then mention it there. That's why I said, even if the second engineer has, he doesn't have the time to check everything. So what he can do is do a basic, check and then write there that this was based on, like a check or overall may be changed, happy for it, whatever, it's subject to change or something like that. Or, there could be certain inaccuracies. We have done our best. So if a port is very strict about it, so that is the way to go about it. You have to mention those in comments and remarks. That's what we don't do. That is what you have to learn, that we can do that. You have the right to do
it. So Sam, it's best that under the remarks better put saying that subject to change due to consumption. Best is that option, right?
And not in your case. In your case, you said that the second engineer pretty much gave you two months back inventory. So that is a wrongful declaration altogether. So no, that's not. See, subject to consumption is when you have certain things which are really subject to consumption. But like paint lockers, all right. So paint stores. So when you declare a paint how much paint you have, you may be subject to consumption. But if you are not taking inventory and you are, I think that's not correct. So that in there you have to mention that this is, especially if the second engineer has told you that I'm not going to do it, then you have to write there that this is subject to factual declaration from second engineer. And clears you of your responsibility as a master. So that shows that you are trusting the somebody, and that's why you have signed it. So that's what.
Okay, understood, Sam. So it's best to put the real facts and sort it out that way, so that you don't take the responsibility after all.
Absolutely. So I'll tell you something. Yeah, Vasala, I'll tell you something. Even the captains I sailed with, and this is talking about, like, I stopped sailing 12 odd years back, and I'm saying before that also, I remember, even with crew declaration, some countries, some ports which are very sensitive about this, the captain, I remember, used to sign there saying that I am not taking responsibility. This is subject to my crew's honest declaration. So he won't take any responsibility. So you have the right to do that. You can do that even with crew declaration, personal effect declaration, all that declaration. You can say that. Chief officer has the right as well. You guys have the right. Nobody can force you to sign something.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Sam.
Yeah. Lovish, that's a good question. Without any prejudice. Yeah, so these are different law terms that people often use. Without any prejudice and all that. So that basically means that what you are signing is not based on any kind of intentional your intention to actually do a wrongful declaration. That's what it means. Without any prejudice means that you don't have any intention to make a mistake. If a mistake has been committed, that is purely unintentional. That is what it means, without any prejudice, to explain it simply. Did you understand?
Yes, sir. I got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
But in my seniors, when I asked them, they used to say that if we write this thing, then it has not anything to courts. Means it is not admissible by courts.
Yeah, that's right. That's also correct. It's not admissible by court because, that's why I told you that if that's why the appropriate thing is signing under protest. That is a better phrase. Although without any prejudice, it is very superficial. They are right. It will not be admissible in court. And that's why I said that when you guys are signing any paper, it is better to, if you don't have the time to check it, then have the stamp. I used to have that stamp. I wish I could show it to you. I didn't bring it with me when I came to Australia, but I used to have that stamp with me, signing under protest. That has no problem at all, because that basically tells you that you didn't get time to check the documents, and you don't use it everywhere. You only use it for the documents that the agent used to bring at the last minute, saying that, oh, you have all these documents, now you have to start signing them. So I had my sign and my stamp ready with me, and I used to just keep stamping it. But yes, you are right. Thanks, Sherry. Without any prejudice actually has it has no value in court. You're right. Your seniors, what they told you was correct. I agree with that.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Sherry. I appreciate your feedback. Thanks. Appreciate it. All right, guys, I'll continue from where we left off because I have another lecture for you guys as well. Today, we're going to talk about the financial management on ships as well. So I hope that everybody's there. Nobody's sleeping, and that's good. So FAL convention, we continue with FAL convention. So like I said, the FAL convention, like any other convention over a period of time, they have tried to keep themselves updated with the current scenarios. They have, because FAL convention was designed in 1965, shipping has changed drastically after that. So they have to keep on updating the convention. So that's why they came up with a lot of new amendments with the convention, because changing the full convention takes a lot of time. So that's why every convention you will see has a lot of amendments in it. They have all these amendments based on the year. So you have the amendments and the year of amendments. So what I've done is I used to have the year and the amendment before, but now I realized it's been long. So what I have is I've basically summarized the amendments for you guys because this pretty much tells you the different areas that the FAL convention has improved upon or they are dealing with. All right. So FAL convention, like I said, they have come up with new forms. They came up with new forms regarding stowaways, carriage of stowaways. So if you have stowaways on board, I'll show you that form when we talk about carriage of stowaways. That's why I don't have the form here. When we talk about carriage of stowaways in a separate lecture, I'll show you the IMO form as well for stowaways, where you have to fill in the information about the stowaways. And they are now, of course, promoting electronic data processing. So what they want is the information to be sent from the port of departure itself electronically, so that by the time you arrive to the next port, your ship is already cleared. Because like I told you, every port is competing with one another for a fast turnaround time. So good ports, developed ports, they don't care about this paperwork. They don't want to delay your ship because of this unnecessary bureaucracy and paperwork. So that's why they have come up with this automatic electronic data processing, where 90% of the information is sent previously, which is the same, which stays the same. Only some information which is subject to change, like cruise effect declaration or some stores which may have been consumed or received or something like that, that is subject to. Otherwise, most of the information that stays the same is sent beforehand for a faster clearance. All right. Better handling of persons rescued at sea and the sick and injured. So these days, of course, if you are involved in any kind of rescue operations as well, and you have rescued people, you pretty much have to use a form like the IMO form for stowaways. You have to use that form. You have to declare the details of the persons rescued. I've talked more about it when we talk about rescuing people at sea and I talk about stowaways. So I don't want to waste too much time talking about this here. We'll talk about that later in a different lecture altogether. FAL convention is also working on, so see, this is what I used to have before, where I used to have the year and the amendment, but it has become very boring because you can see some amendments have been introduced in 2002. You don't have to worry about that. But it was in 2002 when they introduced the dangerous goods manifest, because they realized that they must have a separate manifest for dangerous goods, which should be declared by the ports. This is just an example to show you what I had before as well as here. So 2005, you can see they introduced the form for persons rescued at sea. And this amendment requires public authorities to facilitate the arrival and departure of ships engaged in the rescue of persons. because sometimes you'll be rescuing many people or sometimes few people. Why this was introduced, I'll give you the background of it as well. Why the stowaway and the rescue form? I'll be repeating it in my next lecture, but doesn't matter because we are on the term. So why it was introduced, I'll tell you why it was introduced. This was introduced to avoid people smuggling, human trafficking. So what they, does FAL deal with the sick on cruise ships as well, Sam? No, that is a separate, someone has asked me, does FAL convention deal with the sick persons on cruise ships? So, you know, you have a separate forms for, I don't know whether you're talking about, okay, I'll come back to this later about the sick person thing, because there's some kind of overlap here as well. All right, so I'll talk about why FAL convention introduced forms for persons rescued at sea and stowaways. That was to avoid with human trafficking, and because they realized that people are trafficking humans, people are smuggling humans, and you know, sometimes it was intentional. Sometimes agents were taking money to do that. Sometimes seafarers were doing that long time back. There have been movies made on it as well. So that to avoid that, they want you guys to declare every person that is there on the ship, whether they are part of the ship's crew or they are, you know, not part of the ship's crew, like stowaways or persons rescued at sea. To come back to the point that this question has been asked is, does FAL deal with sick people on cruise ships? To be honest, sick people on cruise ships should, are you talking about passengers? Then yes, you will have to include that in the passenger. Oh yes, does FAL, yes, you have asked about passengers. Sorry, I thought it was talking about cargo ships, because on cargo ships, we have the forms available, the medical forms available, separate medical forms available as per the flag state. But cruise ships will definitely have a form, but it will be part of the passenger manifest. So if somebody is sick, they will have to mention it on the passenger manifest itself. That is how it deals with. No separate forms for passengers, if I remember correctly. It's part of the passenger manifest only. All right. All right, so here you can see here, I have talked about passengers as well. So amendments concerning documents, arrival and departure, as in rescue, that is COVID. I'm not sure what is happening with the COVID scenario right now. I haven't seen that FAL convention has come out with something new here with regarding documentation, but documentation is still the same. I think the declaration has become more deep now, but yes, you guys will have to find that out when you guys do the research regarding the question. But regarding documentation, no new forms have been introduced as far as I know, because yesterday only I went into the IMO website and I went to the FAL convention. They haven't introduced any new form, but I'm sure the declaration has become more strict and more detailed. Maybe they need more information now for sure. So you can see here that how in 2009 they introduced all the requirements regarding passenger ships and cruises and passengers and all that. So even if you have any sick passengers on board, it will be part of the passenger manifest, and you have to introduce that in the passenger manifest. You may have to provide additional documentation about sick people. That's pretty much what I know. And then 2016 also you had certain other amendments, and don't want to talk you through all that. That is regarding the ship and port facilities. So and ISPS became very strict. They started becoming more strict about the cargo transport units. So what are you carrying in the cargo? Electronic exchange of information. Then you have to use only a single window system. So the single window system refers to now one point of exchange only, not multiple point of exchange. You don't have to provide the same information to a number of parties. You just have to provide it once to one single party, and that party will provide it to all the number of parties. So they're trying to reduce the paperwork required, reduce the time involved in the paperwork. So they're coming out with all these things as well. All right. All the forms have been revised. So this is pretty much it. And then, of course, FAL convention is also working on the harmonization of the ship certificates. So as you probably know that a ship carries a number of certificates. We have so many certificates, you know, ship construction, ship safety, radio equipment, so on and so forth. So what the FAL convention is working now is to harmonize all the certification under one broad certificate. Because, you know, I mean, when you go to ports, the agent pretty much takes away those certificates sometimes, all the original certificates, and that increases the risk of agent losing those certificates. I remember on one ship, one of my, you know, that those days the cadet used to be in, the cadet was being sent to the company with the certificates, and the agent would use it and then send the cadet back with the certificates. One of the cadets actually lost those ship certificates. It was a big case in my company. After that, they stopped using the cadets for carrying ship certificates. So ship certificates, to avoid it getting lost, and also to make the survey system easy and harmonized, what they are trying to do. You know that the harmonized system of certification already exists. So in terms of certificates also, they are trying to issue only one certificate, which will have the list of all certificates, and that can be updated also quickly if you go through any kind of annual survey process and all that. So they are working on that. They are trying to put all the certificates under one board certificate and making it easy for any kind of survey or any kind of updates to take place, and also to easy maintain it on the ship as well. All right, try to reduce the number as much as possible. So if you don't know, I don't know if you have sailed with anybody from Myanmar. Today Myanmar is coming up a number of times. So seafarers from Myanmar, you know, they have a document like that. They have one single document where all their certificates are mentioned. So they don't require to carry all their certificates. So that is one document that their government allows. So especially if they are sailing on their ships, on their home port vessels, they don't have to carry all the certificates. Like I still have all my certificates with me, ARPA, Radar, PSSR, AFF, all the certificates. I used to carry hundreds of those certificates, but those guys were not carrying it. So they used to have only one certificate, which had all the certificates in that, all the details about that. So that was making it very easy. I don't know what's the scenario now, but yeah, that is what FAL Convention is working on for ship certificates as well. And then the important thing FAL Convention is working on, that you guys should take a note of, is they are working on training seafarers or people related to the maritime industry to place them in different operations of the sea vessels. So what IMO found was that many people who are working ashore, because they have not been seafarers, they don't understand. Yeah, that's right, Malindo, I agree. Chinese also have one certificate. So what they realized, IMO realized, was that many of these ship operations, I'll give you the example of these ship operations. For example, pilotage, VTS, tug assistance, mooring services, ship handling, port passage planning, so on and so forth. Now, many of these places, of course, the seafarers are already, they're finding some shore jobs there, but there are still many areas of ship operations where ex-seafarers are not finding employment, or they were not aware of it, or they were not being trained for it. So FAL Convention is coming up with guidelines and training requirements and procedures, and they are introducing it state by state, so that seafarers who are looking to settle ashore now, who want to leave their jobs ashore, they can find training in those areas and find employment in these different areas. Because IMO realizes as well, together with FAL Convention, that the more the seafarers are trained in these different operations, it will make the shipping operations smoother, because a seafarer will understand operations from the seafaring side, the ship side, as well as from the shore side if they are trained for it. And if they are involved in all these areas, then they will make the process of port clearance much smoother, easier, and more transparent. So you may find jobs in these areas now in the near future, actually, not very far. Many of you have found work already in tug services. You are selling as tug masters, but also in terms of, hydrography, marine information systems, VTS, pollution control. And that's why a lot of money is being invested, as you know, in AMC as well. In the defense industry, the Australian defense has invested about $1 billion or something. And that is what their aim is, to train their Navy personnel, that is the Navy, the armed Navy, as well as people of the merchant Navy, in these different aspects, all these different aspects. So if you guys are interested in research or in other areas as well, I strongly urge you or encourage you to come and become part of this, especially if you have been sailing for long. Now you are looking for opportunities to settle ashore. This is the time when the countries are making investments towards it. All right, any questions before I go to the next slide, my next presentation? Any questions? No? You guys are still awake, right?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Good. Any
You're wide
questions?
awake, sir.
All right, I'll quickly finish this lecture and then I'll let you guys go. But if you have any questions, please stay back and ask me. So you can see my next slide. This is my next topic here. It's financial resource management. And like I told you, a seafarer's very important role here is financial resource management, especially from a senior officer's perspective. Jen has gone to sleep, is it? No. Jen, did you go to sleep? All right. Priyan is asleep. All right. Let's keep going. All right. So financial resource management for seafarers. Now, this is very important for you guys, because when you become senior officers, you are the owner's representative. So part of your job is to understand, not a big part of your job, is to work in the financial interest of the company. The shipping company, the owners, they want money. That's why they have bought ships, and that's why they have put you on the ships. And that's why they put you as senior officers, because they thought that you are going to do a good job. When we say good job, that means taking care of their financial interests. So when we talk about port clearance, we talk about avoiding unnecessary delays, whether we talk about avoiding conflicts on the ship, maintaining safety, everything is related to avoiding delays. Because if you have delays, then that costs companies money. And companies don't like to spend money. They only like to earn money. And that's why they have put you on the ship as a senior officer. All right. So having an interest or idea about budgeting is very important. I don't know how much of you guys are interested in financial budgets or how much exposure you guys get. But as I go through the slides, please let me know whether you guys have seen your senior officers being involved in these operations or not. All right. So I'll give you a little bit background about what we did as master. So as a master in my company, the company I sail with as a master, I was responsible for paying the crew overtime in cash and the crew salary also in cash. So only the officer's salary used to go to the bank accounts. The crew salary, the crew overtime, the cash advance was paid in cash. I don't know if it's the same or not. I don't think nowadays, of course, all salaries are going in banks. I know that, I'm aware of that, but I'm sure some masters are dealing with cash advance as well. So that was my role. So we had to understand this cash thing, and sometimes we would have to buy stores, provisions using ship's cash, and we had to maintain an account of it. And that was that had to include the different exchange rates and all that as well. So we had to maintain a budget. So we'll talk about that, and the catering budget as well and all that. So different companies have different requirements. I understand that maybe in your company you don't have to do anything with it, but there are certain budgetary issues that you have to be very aware of, and you have to understand why you are required to have a knowledge of it. All right. So ship budgets, of course, are very important because everything is related to the profit that the owner is making or the charterer is making. So any kind of variation in trade routes, charter parties, cost of fuel, stores, repairs, they all have an impact on the budget and the resultant profit of the ship owner. So anything that will affect ship owner in that way, they will view it very seriously. Now what happens with seafarers is we are excluded from the budget that is assigned to a vessel by the people working ashore. So people working in the company, the finance department, the accounts department of the shipping company, they don't exclude seafarers when they are deciding on a budget. We are kept excluded. Correct me if I'm wrong. So we don't have much knowledge about that. We are pretty much depending on a particular superintendent or a particular representative from the finance or account department to approve of anything. So we don't have a say in that, right? So ship staff is mostly unaware. However, you are expected to assist the ship owner in managing the budgets, although you have no idea of the budget, but they are expecting you to manage the cost associated with ship stores or provisions or inventory or anything like that. Now the ship staff is not compensated for this kind of financial savings, and therefore they are not motivated and they have no interest also. There were some companies, I remember, where the captain was getting incentives and the chief cook was getting incentives if they could keep the cost of provisions low. Now that was leading to a lot of problems in many shipping companies because the captain and the chief cook together were only looking at their own interest, and to get that kind of incentive, they were compromising on the kind of food they should have been providing to the ship's crew. Now, any of you guys sailing on ships where these issues are there, where the incentives are there and people are not using this incentive correctly, or anybody has any story to share?
I used to sail on a fairly large container line, and there were definitely times that it felt like the food suffered because, and the overall maintenance suffered because the guys had that system in place.
Yes, correct. Absolutely. Jen, thank you very much for that input. This happens all the time. In my company, there was also an issue with a certain nationality of crew who were not happy with the provisions that was being provided for their food by the company. So the company told the master that, you know, the crew should be allowed to buy their own provisions, and a certain budget was allotted to it. But a lot of issues came up regarding that. And so many countries these days, they discourage, or rather not many countries, but many shipping companies are discouraging from this kind of incentivizing system or incentive system, but still it is being practiced. So I thought I'll ask you guys on how you guys are going about this kind of thing. So as a senior officer, what is your role and all that? We'll talk about that as well. So like I told you, post global financial crisis in 2008, we had the global financial crisis. After that, ships are being operated on very tight budgets. And today, after COVID, you will see people are predicting that a financial crisis is looming. A financial crisis is around the corner, and you will see that the shipping companies will definitely tighten their budgets further. By the time you guys become senior officers, captains, chief engineers, you will have to face consequences of these tight budgets. So what does that mean for you guys? We'll talk about that. So you have been put on the ship to ensure efficient operations within the stipulated budget, which you actually have no idea about. You have no idea. Do you guys have any idea about the budget allotted to your ship? Any idea? No. No? Yes? Okay.
Sam, it comes from different departments. Like for stores, engine store is separate, deck stores is separate, and food it comes separate. Like for food, I know it's $8 a day for a person. And based on the age of the ship, your budget changes as well. So it's not fixed. So sometimes if you are required some additional stores, it comes from another budget, like from the dry dock budget, maybe they cut off something and get you there.
Yeah. $8 is so specific. Which company are you selling with, Vasala, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm working for Seaspan Ship Management.
Okay, Seaspan. Okay, sorry. Yeah, because we had $8 as well, and that was way back. I was thinking, why is that specific number? All right. So yeah, Lovish, thank you very much. Karan, okay. Karan, I have never heard your name before. First class? Okay. Anyhow, not important. That's right. So you have a certain budget allotted, but that is a food budget. Yes, we are aware of the food budget, but whether we are fulfilling that food budget or not, it's a very vague area. There's not much transparency from the shore side regarding whether we have budgets or not. Jen says we have a budget of 32 a day per person on average, which is pretty good, and most of the other part is done through the superintendent ashore. Absolutely correct. So there is not much transparency, and they will not have that transparency there because they don't want you to know about the budget system as well. In our company, they would always quote example of the sister ships. Sister ships are doing this, sister ships are doing that. Why are you guys spending more? So I'll give you some tips on what to do, and of course I'll talk about your role as well. $500 per month, pretty good, fantastic, not bad.
I worked with Maldivian ships once called Nazaki. We used to buy fish from the fishing men around the Bay of Bengal. So I think a couple of dollars a day, the budget, something like that, you know, so just eat dry fish and live, you know, that was 1999 when I must go to sea for for my ticket sea times and that.
Correct. So see, at the end of the day, the budget all comes down to this. So as you can see in the last line in my slide here, that at the end of the day, whatever said and done, you have to avoid delays, any kind of off-hires, incidents, breakdowns, accidents, or even the occurrence at the lowest possible operating cost. So you have to keep the cost low. So why I'm talking about this is because budget is also talks about ordering spare parts, ordering what you require for maintenance, for safety. And if the superintendent is not providing you with that, what is the implication of that? All right, so what are the contributions of a senior officer? So that is what we have to know about it, all right? So you have to observe due diligence while ordering spares and stores. Now, this is very much related to what we were talking about before when we talked about FAL convention. So as I said that FAL convention requires you to often check your stores to take an inventory, and that is very handy. It's actually very useful for all departments to do that, because that also helps you to order stores and spare parts if required. Because the worst thing is if you have ordered some expensive spare parts and the superintendent comes to know that it's already there on board your ship and you are not aware of it, and they come on board and they help you find it, it's very embarrassing. So thanks. So that should not be the case. So as a senior officer, don't put yourself in that situation where you are not even aware of what is there on your ship and now you're ordering it. So that will not be viewed very kindly by your company. All right, so make sure that you have a thorough inventory. As soon as you join the ship, irrespective of the inventory given to you, irrespective of the list of stores given to you, you must carry out a thorough inventory yourself. Take the help of your ship's crew if you have to. You are the senior officer now. You can ask them, but take a thorough inventory and make sure that you note down what you have on the ship before you start ordering stuff. All right. You also have to educate your crew about the importance of maintenance to avoid any kind of breakdowns and repairs. So the planned maintenance should be carried out as per the planned maintenance schedule. Everything should be maintained, because if something breaks down and you're ordering for it, of course you're ordering for it, but the superintendent will definitely ask you, why was the breakdown? Was it a wear and tear? Was it due to poor maintenance? Because if you're ordering stuff that's costing them money, and that's because you are not doing a good job, again, that will not be viewed kindly. So I can see you guys are all talking about food. You better listen to me as well. All right, I'm feeling hungry as well. So don't stop talking about lobsters. I don't want to look at lobsters and think about lobsters. All right. Involve the crew in the budget management through efficient utilization of ship's resources. Make sure that you guys involve the crew, and I've told you how to involve the crew. Make sure you get them involved in doing an inventory check, a thorough inventory check, so that everybody knows what is there on board before you start ordering it. In terms of fuel savings, of course, you have to think about voyage planning, taking the shortest route for the deck officers, of course, machinery being switched off when not in use for the engineers, the generators being stopped when not in use, etc. So the more fuel you save, the fuel is of course the most important or most costly aspect of running a ship. So make sure you save there. So these are some of the ways you can contribute as a senior officer, and that is what is required. It continues to go into, of course, inventory and stores checked, switching off unwanted machines when not in use, managing resources that are already there with you, such as provisions, paper, stores, etc. Recycling paper, recycling stores if you can, conducting schedule plan maintenance. We've talked about that already, educating oneself about ship's budgets, which we are doing right now, and then honesty and integrity. So one thing I'll tell you is that if you are involved in any kind of cash transaction, it's very important that you maintain a spreadsheet and be very thorough with that spreadsheet. Don't spare anything in that spreadsheet, especially if it involves exchange rates of different countries. Sometimes you may go into another country and purchase certain stores or food or provisions. Make sure you're very thorough. You are keeping evidence of everything. If you have exchanged money at a certain rate, keep a receipt of that. So the more evidence, the more transactions, the more thorough you are in your budget keeping and accounting, the more the company will start to trust you. You will develop a good reputation in the company, and that is what the company wants. From senior officers, they want to see that the senior officer has the best interest of the company at heart. And that is why I said tomorrow, if you are legally protecting yourself, you are also legally protecting your company, your master, your ship owner. So an example I always tell you is when I was asked to rush to the pilot station, I was asked to increase speed in the pilotage, not in the pilotage waters, but in the Singapore Straits, especially. I was not very comfortable with it. And that is what I told the company, that if there was a collision, what would you say to me? You would sack me. The ship would have a problem. So of course they were not happy. They always want that commercial aspect first, but you can always justify. So if you can justify it from a commercial aspect of view, then of course the company will be very happy with you as well. All right. The ship owner should of course come up with a system of rewarding better financial management, but there are always issues with that, because like I told you in the past, there have been issues where the ship owners have tried to reward, but they have rewarded individuals like the master or the catering crew, and that has led to complications, because when an individual is motivated by an incentive, but the rest of them are not involved, then it affects the overall ship operation. So if tomorrow you are the senior officer and you are aware that, for example, the chief cook is going to be incentivized, you have to make sure that he doesn't become selfish or she doesn't become selfish in that operation. Or if you are being incentivized for saving money, you keep the process very transparent on the ship. Make sure that everybody is aware of it, because you don't want to be the kind of captain or the chief engineer, who is only looking out for his or her own interest, and the crew is suffering because of that. So don't be that kind of a senior officer. That is where so anyhow, so a few takes from this is, be aware of the cash transactions or the budget systems that you are responsible for. Make sure you do a very thorough job. Make sure you're maintaining documentation, spreadsheets. I don't know whether you guys are comfortable with spreadsheets or not. You have to start making spreadsheets for everything possible if required, especially for financial transactions. Like I said, when I was the captain, I was also required to pay overtime, cash in hand, cash advance. So you have to be very thorough with that. And at the same time, because we were keeping cash on board, we used to be very worried about being robbed or piracy attack and all that. So quickly I used to get rid of the cash that I had with me so that the crew get it. But there are other issues there as well. So that's not about budget. But make sure you stick to the budget, because the company expects you to do that. All right. Any questions, queries, concerns? Any feedback you want to give me? Anything that is happening on your ship which is different from what we've talked about?
It's in Australia, I don't know whether you're aware of this, what they call just-in-time budgeting.
It's there in many places. You'll be surprised. But tell me.
Yeah, well, it was developed by BHP and then come on to BHP shipping about 10 years ago. But basically, they come up with it at the mine sites.
Yeah, that's yeah, absolutely correct. That's true. So is it working in your favor as a seafarers? Is it working?
Well, on the 2 ships we run, like most of our problems comes from, like, we call them the fubs upstairs, because we burn about $1 million of fuel a month. So the biggest thing in our company is our fuel bill.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So yeah, I mean, see, that's what I said, that from your side, there should not be any lapses in kind of maintaining the budget. I'll give you an example that happened on one of my ships. I remember we were in the US ports. We were going to US ports, and US ports, I don't know if you guys have been to US ports. They are very strict about IMO symbols. So we had those IMO stickers, you know, those that glow in the dark for emergency escape, fire hydrant and all that. So they are very strict about that. Now they found that we didn't have certain IMO stickers in certain places, and some of the IMO stickers were painted over. Somebody had painted over. So they asked us to make sure before we sail out, we have those IMO stickers in place, because US is very strict about it. Now, what the chief officer did was, he didn't know that we already had those IMO stickers on board. There were some kept. And what he did is, immediately in a state of panic, he sent an order out for IMO stickers. These IMO stickers are very expensive. You'll be surprised to know. The company superintendent was aware of these IMO stickers. That's what story I was telling you about before. And he said, I know exactly where the stickers are on your ship. How come you don't know about it? And the chief officer was left red-faced and very embarrassed. And the superintendent actually came to see him later on, and he said that you have been on the ship for some time now, you should be knowing. So again, I know this is not related to what you were saying, Phil, about just-in-time budget, but from your side, there should not be any lapses about any kind of thing that affects the budget assured. Because what they normally go by, I can give you some insight to it. What they normally go by is, they look at the ships. Normally they put sister ships or similar ships on the same kind of route and trade, and they see how they're operating. So if you have been given a budget, make sure you use it fully. Also, don't underuse the budget. If you underuse the budget, they will lower it further. So if you have like $300, $600 allotted to entertainment, make sure you use the full $300, $600 that is allotted to you. Otherwise, they will make it lesser, and they will make it lesser for the other ships as well, because they will say other ships are doing it. I mean, these are some of the things that I have experienced in the past. I'm not saying this will happen to you as well, but these are some of the areas that you have to be very mindful of. Anyway, I'll stop talking now. Any other stories from you guys? Any other feedback, comments, anything?
What's happened once at the same ship, there was Maldivian ships, Sam. Once the ship owners and representative and the superintendents arrive to the ships, and they say, please ask the steward or steward assistants for water or juice, whatever, you know, that we are very thirsty. So I asked the steward from India at the time, and I said, Shankar, please make them some juice. That's you know, that preservatives, that's a thick juice together. You know, they come like you add water and mix it up together. And he went there and gave them this juice and that. And they bloody tired us. You know, they really very greedy. And they start, you know, telling me, who told you that? Why are you this, you bringing this to us? This is budget from the ship. So I went there, and I saw him like nearly crying. You know, he was just very upset. I said, I told him that, you know, you don't want to spend money, any money, and you want water and juice. What are we going to get you? You know, we're going to get you seawater. So I said, I better go home, you know. I said, sign me off. Bloody, you know, $650 a month we used to get, you know, and I don't need much of SETA. Just I can't stay home. Like, I like always to be at work. So,
right, so thanks Eddie, thank you, that was good. So I just thought I'll quickly discuss this, that we have you know, thanks Priyan for sharing it. This is something that Priyan shared it on the chat. I'm sure you guys have seen it. So this, he says that, you know, in their company they have something linked with the cloud, where everything is fed to the system and the cash receipt is uploaded, so all is handled by the office. So master needs to tally the onboard cash. So that's a good system as well. Thank you for letting me know, Priyan. I'm going to use this in my slide for next year as well. Just an example on, I hope you're okay with that. Thank you for sharing that. That's a useful thing. Any other people have any other experiences on their ships as in terms of budgets? Even if you are not involved, you have seen your senior officers doing it?
Can you explain the just-in-time budgeting?
Yes, Phil, please go ahead. You tell about the just-in-time budget.
Yeah, when BHP, instead of having program maintenance where you do things on hours or on a periodic time, they worked out that, you might get 30,000 hours out of an engine, so they won't order any parts until 29,000 hours. But sometimes if you have a disaster, you get caught without any parts on hand.
So if you just need something more, David, regarding just-in-time was a principle found from one of the shore-based, I can't remember which company it was. I think maybe it was Ford or some other company. I think it was a car company where they came up with this concept of just-in-time. And because this is based on that, you can't allot a very specific budget to a certain operation. So you have to keep it flexible. So that is just-in-time is basically talking about flexibility in the budgeting and not having a very strict budget to systems, and because they don't work very well in the modern industry. So in the olden days, they had strict budgets and that didn't work very well. Like I said, it's always about flexibility, about contingency approach. So just in time, other words are contingency approach, flexibility, where the departments have that flexibility to play around with the budget if it is required. So that is just in time. Anybody else? Yeah, sorry. Anybody else?
The downside there, Sam, is that most of them pushed it to not to be efficient, but to improve their bottom line, and then you have disasters that come because nobody has spare parts on hand, and that was the downside. I first come across it as BHP. I thought invented it back in the 70s, and then it went on to BHP shipping.
Okay, I see. All right. So yeah, I'm not aware about that, but yes, just thought that's a good one, Phil. Thank you very much. Anybody else?
Doesn't take into account downtime. That sounds very familiar.
Yeah. No, that's right. See, all these approaches are also being increasingly used these days. There's another concept, I forgot the term associated for it. They also shift the budgets around in the departments depending on who needs it more. So there's another term for it as well. It's very close to just in time, but you have the accounts department, you have the spare parts department, you have different departments. These days they have this approach where, if certain department doesn't require that fund, they will take that fund and shift it, or they allow the departments to share the funds so that you give extra share of your budget to the other department, and then when you require it, you can ask them for that budget back. So that's some term for that as well. I've forgotten some financial term for it as well. Just in time is about minimizing stock levels. Stock is money sitting on the shelf. Yeah, absolutely correct, Darren. That's correct as well. People used to make business buying gold. Okay, very good. Anybody else who wants to mention anything about the budget systems? Because you see, you guys are sailing in different companies. You will have something to share, which we can all learn from. Anybody else has to share something? All right, so some good points today you guys have shared. Thank you for that. Like I said, this is a hard topic for me to teach because I can only tell you about from my experience, but you guys are sailing in different companies. You have all these different systems on board. There is no standard system that I can teach you guys. I can only tell you about the points and all that. All right, if nothing else to share, we'll close the lecture today. We'll stop the lecture here. But you guys can stay back if you have any doubts, any queries, concerns. Otherwise, I'll see you guys on the 11th of September.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you guys.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Is there anything we have to do over the semester break?
No, nothing. You don't have to do anything. Thanks, Jen. Enjoy the weekend. No, nothing. You don't have to do anything.
Okay.
Yeah, easy.
Thanks, Sam.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, buddy. Thanks.
So next class is on the 11th. Is that right, Sam?
Yes, that's what I saw on the timetable. It's 11th of September.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.